Okay, everyone, hang on to your butts because we are here with the Mary Sue, and today they're asking the hard hitting questions. Can they remake Final Fantasy VII without the sexism? By Sandy Beaches. I'm guessing there's a land whale joke in here somewhere. But anyway, let's see what they have to say about this because rest assured that it's going to be stupid and it's going to be twisting the narrative of the game into something that it's not. There was a time in my life where I would have said Final Fantasy VII was the best game I'd ever played. I've finished it more times than I can count, which is probably not very high. I used to own as much merch as my poor display cabinet could possibly hold, and I'd rarely be able to play a JRPG without thinking Final Fantasy VII did it better. But time and experience changes everything, as does revisionist history. And on my last playthrough, a few weeks ago, everything wrong with the game became painfully evident. Now, you'd think this would be related to game mechanics and graphics and whatnot, but no. It's about the portrayal of certain story elements and characters. You might be thinking that I realized that I was a prisoner of nostalgia or that the gameplay aged terribly. Just like I said. In truth, I wish it were either of those things because the announcement of a remake would have made me squee like a good fangirl as opposed to making me melancholic. Does it really get to you that much when you see story elements that you disagree with or that you twist into being used for your political agenda? I mean, come on. What's happened in our industry over the past year has opened my eyes to the problems in games, and that included my formerly beloved Final Fantasy VII. I wonder what she's referring to with this past year. Probably Gamergate or something. I look at Tifa and realize now how over-sexualized she is. Less a character and more a caricature of womanhood made to pander to teenage boys that can't appreciate a fighting woman unless she's also a sex toy. Yeah, except nothing sexual really happens with Tifa from what I remember. Okay, sure. She in the FMV sequences, I will give them that her breasts look ridiculous. But her artwork, not bad. I no longer chuckle at the hatred towards Yuffie because it's not only unwarranted but serves to further detriment the stories of minorities and those that want to save their culture from unrestricted capitalist growth. More on this later. Okay, I will reserve my opinion on that until later then. Lastly, and most offensively, of course, is the treatment of women in the game. Cid is an alcoholic. What do you think he meant by tea in that notorious scene? Abuser of his assistant Shira, and there's a silent endorsement on the part of other characters when they refuse to acknowledge or confront him about his disgusting actions. Oh boy. Okay, so on Cid and Shira, I don't know if they're going to talk about this more later, but he doesn't have a problem with her because she's a woman. In the same matricidal stride that Disney has taken with a majority of its stories, Final Fantasy VII seems to adore dead and or tortured mothers. Look at the parentage of Red 13, Aerith, Cloud, Lucretia, Genova. The list goes on. Wasn't Red 13's dad turned to stone or something? And Aerith, probably gaming's most celebrated and best known refrigerator trope. One of the few female characters in the video game who is not sexualized, whose powers are non-violent, who has a respect for culture and growth, and who has actual character development, is killed in an extremely brutal way just to serve as a motivation for Cloud, who is a literal blank slate in the game. So now Cloud has no backstory. Okay, as convoluted as Cloud's backstory is, he still has one. Figuring out his identity is part of coming to terms with who he is as a character. As for Aerith, her dying actually ends up saving the world. I won't be going into detail about the implied rape that Hojo is responsible for in the game. All right, no. Hojo didn't rape anybody. I think they're talking about Lucretia. The situation is that Lucretia felt guilty for the death of Vincent's father, and she chose Hojo instead of Vincent thanks to that. So they had some sort of relationship. There was no rape or implied rape. I don't know what game you played. in the game because it's not a topic that I like to talk about, but I would be completely remiss if I didn't urge audiences to research it for themselves. And when they do research it for themselves, they will find out that you are completely disingenuous. But there is always hope for the remake because there are chances to make things better, to make things right. Here are some of my suggestions. Tifa should not be a fighting fuck toy, which you learned from Anita Sarkeesian because I've never heard that term used until then. While all the female characters in Final Fantasy VII follow the same unrealistic proportions, unrealistic female bodies in video games? Sorry, but it's not unrealistic. The FMV sequence, yeah, maybe unrealistic looking, but it was old graphics. Tifa is perhaps the most egregious example of male fantasy gone awry, unnaturally busty, with a hip-to-waist ratio that would mean in real life she wouldn't have room for bowels, as she is essentially fighting fuck toy. As much as the MRAs and gamergators of the world will point to her achievements as a character and how kick-arse she is, they will never acknowledge how her overly sexualized body detracts from her whole. Why would a sexualized body have to detract from her character? Plus, you're implying that it's sexual just because of what she's wearing. Isn't that like a no-no for your ideology? Unfortunately, Tifa's proportions are so unholy that it might make the casual observer miss how every female body type in the game is the same, unnaturally slim with perky breasts and a prominent behind. Are you kidding me? Go play this game again and look at the body types. They're polygons. They're blocky Lego people. The remake can change this. We need more diverse body types in video games because, shock and horror, there are women of different sizes, shapes, and weight in the world. Yeah, unless those women are skinny or have large breasts, then for some reason they're unrealistic. I'm sure if the developers at Square Enix looked around the office, they'd definitely see some variety. Shira should stand up to her abuser. Okay, let's get into this. How could anyone possibly think that when Cloud and the team, and further the developers of Final Fantasy, say that, oh hey, Cid treats women like garbage, he should definitely accompany you on a journey to save the world, it is anything less than saying domestic abuse is a non-issue, or that it shouldn't factor into how you choose your friends. To a lesser extent, this is also hugely problematic in terms of the narrative, because it's an obvious problem that's glaring and begging to be addressed within the plot. Why else would they have this kind of relationship in the game? Before I say anything, I'm just going to read the last bit of this. This can be solved really easily. Just add a few lines of dialogue where Shira stands up for herself, where the rest of the team can step in on her side. So, white knighting, Cid can apologize, and you should be able to choose whether or not the apology is accepted. Either accepting Cid onto the team or leaving him where he is. Personally, I would be leaving him on the ranch. I wouldn't trust someone with that attitude on a cramped ship. Okay, so Cid does not abuse women. Cid does not mistreat Shira because he thinks women are garbage or something of that line of thought. What the problem is that Cid blames Shira for missing his opportunity to go into outer space because she was repairing something that she perceived to be a fault in the launch, and so rather than burning her alive, he pressed the off button, the cancel button on the launch. So he resents her. And Shira, blaming herself for destroying Cid's dream, hangs around Cid and waits on him hand and foot and takes the mistreatment because she believes it is deserved. Now, as for the apology, if you actually played the game, which you claim to have multiple times, you would realize that Cid later does apologize for his actions and the way he treated her when he realizes that Shira did have a justified reason to cancel the original launch. So, narrative destroyed. Moving on. Yuffie's culture should be celebrated and more prominent. Why? Yuffie's side quest involving her village's attempt to hold on to its traditional values in the face of capitalist expansion is supposed to be lighthearted. The music, the dialogue, and Yuffie's actions culminate in a slapstick routine rather than serious consideration of how Western values and Western values concerning economic growth have hurt and destroyed minorities' cultures. Oh boy. Why not revamp this mission entirely, pour the focus away from absurdity, cultural survival, how funny, to something resembling what minority cultures feel and have experienced when it comes to attacks on their identity? This might take some actual research and talking to minority groups. I know, real work is hard. Kind of like playing a game and analyzing it for what it actually is than what you perceive it to be and what it could be. but it is without question that this will make for a deeper, more enjoyable experience for players and give them a good dose of empathy to wash it down. Okay. Now, this is stupid because Final Fantasy VII was created in Japan. Wutai is a combination, as far as I can tell, is a combination of Japanese and Chinese culture. If they thought it was a problem, why would they mock their own culture? You're looking at it through, ironically, you're talking about Western values, Western traditions, but you are looking at it through a Western lens. Oh, and while we're revamping things, Cloud should die in the place of Aerith. Yes, the main character of the video game should die in place of a side character. Sure, why not? Because it makes total sense to play as this guy, all the way through almost to the end of the first disc, I believe, and then suddenly you just take over as someone else. Yeah, nobody would be upset about that. I know that saying this will upset a lot of people, but it makes sense on so many levels. Not really, because you could just start the game as Aerith if you want her to be the main character. Cloud is a blank slate whose life is mostly a lie, which we discover throughout the game. Aerith is the last surviving Cetra whose existence has profound meaning. From that alone, it's easy to see that Cloud's life has less weight than Aerith's. Why not just say what's really going on here? Cloud has a penis, so his life is worth less. And further, the game wouldn't have to change from that point onwards. The crew can mourn Cloud, but they can still beat the weapons. But Cloud's identity crisis would go unresolved. They can still fight Sephiroth. They can still put their faith in their leader, but this time their leader will be Aerith, whose wise and gentle counsel will make sense, as opposed to Cloud's constant whining. Further, if Aerith takes up the Buster Sword, even though she uses staffs, then it remains a symbol for continued life, which is any good Final Fantasy VII player would know. Aerith is the literal embodiment of from Angeal to Zack, from Zack to Cloud, from Cloud to Aerith, where instead of the weapon being passed on again and again to soldiers who only know fighting and death and are trained in using gigantic swords, it passes into the hands of someone who knows the value of life and healing. Way to take away Aerith's usefulness just because she dies. Okay, the fact that she dies is what saves the world, because she's able to tap into the life stream and use it to help the white materia or the holy materia destroy the meteor. Without Aerith dying, she wouldn't be part of the life stream and wouldn't be able to take command of it and save the world. Can Square Enix pull it off? I think they have what it takes to stand up to the challenge. Recently, they've been responsible for both the new bad arse Lara Croft and Lightning, so I think they definitely have the skill and the imagination to adjust their classic game to be more reflective of a better world. For me, this is what a remake is for, making changes that couldn't have existed at the time of its original release. Only time will tell. Yeah, except for the part where it totally could exist had they wanted to tell the story that way. You are completely ignoring the creative freedom of the developers and the storytellers. This is the story they wrote, so it doesn't need to be changed just because you think it's some backwards worldview. And the best part is they're not acknowledging the character development, the plot development. It's not like they present all these things and it stays the same. Like the thing with Cid. He eventually comes to a resolution. He and Shira end up okay. Mistakes were made. Mistakes are acknowledged. Mistakes are to learn from. Conflict creates interesting plots. If everything is all hunky-dory, there's no need to even tell a story because conflict creates interesting narratives. I don't know how to get through to you guys anymore. Final Fantasy VII is by no means a perfect game. I personally think it's highly overrated. It has a convoluted plot, but none of the things that have been said here were justified. This is all pushing a political agenda onto a story from 1997. Nothing needs to change. If the company wants to change things, great on them, but it doesn't need to. How about they focus on making it a complete game rather than releasing it as episodic? Let's not worry about social issues. All right, thank you for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.